and its impact. So this is one impact that is realized with industrialization, with women going into the workforce, is that you're going to see the role and the size of families eventually be impacted as more and more women have are presented with more opportunities to get a job, to start a career, go to school, get involved in civics. You're going to see that women's roles will change within the family. There was one time, right, that a big family was necessary, but now is no longer needed. What you're going to see is that families are going to be smaller, at least half the size of previous generations. And so a lot of that has to do with industrialization. Um, Women, like I said, will have more opportunities. They are more focused on careers, on education, than actually family, creating a family. And so one of the things that allows that to happen is, the impact of having smaller families is that you don't have to focus so much on so many kids that you have. You have less amount of kids, so you can really focus on it, on helping them out. So one of the things that you see, the cause of the low birth rate is obviously the introduction of contraceptives at the mid to latter part of the 1800s. And again, this is something that for a lot of couples, um, children were not in the plans, because they were more involved, more worried about their economics, growing their wealth. And what you're going to see with the introduction of education, right? For a long time, education in the United States was not something that was provided. It was usually in church when you received education, but eventually, states and then nationwide, you're going to see compulsory education laws. Compulsory education basically means forced education, like you have to go to school. Um, so one committee is created, and to decide upon education. They follow what's known as the Prussian model, where it's basically that all students go to school for 12 years, and they go, all the 6-year-olds go together, all the 7-year-olds go together, no matter um, the skill level, no matter the knowledge acquired, you moved on with your group. And so you're going to see that the creation of high schools are going to be important for the industrial world. So primary schools, first kindergartens were created to help the women who are now being going to the workforce. So that's the one of impact. Childcare facilities, all of that had to be created for women now going into the workforce. And then the primary schools, like I mentioned, usually were, you know, you went to school for about 14, 16 weeks a year. You went for a couple hours, 3 or 4 hours a day. You focus on reading, arithmetic, and writing. And then eventually there was a need for a secondary education. That's when you see the building or the creation of high school. So high school education was first, still the same, math, writing, reading, but they start to incorporate other courses like science, like social science, civics, professional or trade education. So you begin to see the molding of a young person. So some of the oldest high schools in our area, right? Santa Ana High School was built in 1889. Anaheim High School was built in 1898. So you see that there's a lot of history in education. The first actual high school was public high school, Slow High School, in 1856, and that's up north. Sacramento High School, 1857. So that's something that you can see that high schools were a necessity for a while, but it doesn't come until the latter part of the 1800s when you begin to see more and more high schools open up. One of the things that you see is that these high schools began a process of tracking. So if you were a male or boy, you took drafting, you took carpentry, machinery. But if you were a female, you did home economics or you did clerk work, like secretary work. So those were the things that you began to see. One of the things that you see as these schools began to spring up, more high schools, more trade schools. One of those trade schools that is created is the Tuskegee Institute, where African Americans were going to receive different training. You could either receive men usually received some kind of training for trade jobs or trade positions, while women received training for to become a nurse or a teacher. And so you begin to see that for Booker T. Washington, that's a priority to educate the masses. But there's a difference. He believed in uh, he believed in equality and achieving equality, and he felt that equality was won for African Americans by acquiring labor skills. That's the only way you were going to become equal. He he's looking for a more gradual change, like not drastic change. So he's obviously preferred by the white population to represent the uh, let's say African American movement, the civil rights movement, because he is somebody who says, hey, if you want to be equal to whites, you got to get a job, you got to get labor skills, and that's something that eventually will take place for African Americans. So, like I said, women begin to take on a more independent role, not necessarily having to marry themselves. They have opportunities, college, careers. Therefore, families are gonna drop. The number of family members is gonna be less. Usually, you families had 3 kids. That's what was popular at the time, not what was before. Um, and these kids, right, are now going to be going into schools because just like women are leaving to go to work, they no longer are home to take care of these kids. So now you need to eventually create a school setting for them. Like I said, 3 kids. That was the ideal number for people that were, middle class, lower class. That's what they searched for. Schools began to spring up throughout the United States. There were makeshift classrooms. There were outside classrooms, as you can see in this picture. So that was a real necessity. And one thing that you need to know about early education and why it was disliked, it was a lot of rote memorization, like memorize this speech or memorize these numbers or memorize these capitals. They also hate him because of the inconsistency in the quality of teachers. They also disliked the physical punishment. So, in this time period, whenever you didn't behave or you didn't bring your homework, the teacher could eventually physically punish you, hit you, and so that's something that for many people who went to school, that's an aspect that they disliked. As you can see, like I said, uh, industrialization brings opportunities for African Americans as well. Become educated. They are now being allowed to, you know, take up trade skills so they could eventually work for a major company. So I mentioned Booker T. Washington, who you see here in this image. Booker T. Washington, like I said, had a more approach of a gradual change. Um, he believed in labor skills to achieve equality. His rival, person who criticized him for basically giving in to the white people, is W. Du Bois. W. Du Bois was an educator. helped found the NAACP. He was a strong believer in change now, not later, now. So that's where he differed from Booker T. Washington. Du Bois believed that you had to get an actual college education to be able to move up in life and become equal to the white man. So obviously, he and Booker T. Washington did not see eye to eye. The next thing that we're going to talk about is basically the importance of women and their opportunities. So, as more and more women began to enter college, there was this whole idea that, you know, um, that if women went to school, like they would become infertile, because there was too much brain activity going on. They also believed that there was just these beliefs that um, women could never ever compete with men. It was just a man's world, you know, and that if they went to school with men, that they would lose their purity and they would be corrupted. That these are the beliefs of these times. Um, that women, if women went to college, they wouldn't be able to learn how to be a right woman or a mother or a wife, uh, and that education would eventually turn uh, the education would turn women more masculine. So these were the thoughts of the time. Uh, and that eventually, if over time, if women and men spend too much time together in schools, uh, getting educated, that they would lose interest in each other. Again, these are all thoughts that were um, brought upon by society at the time. And the idea is that that's why when education first began for women, it had to be same-sex schools because, society just didn't agree with co-ed campuses. Eventually, co-ed campuses came to be as people realized that these ideas were not true, and you really got to see this sense first at the Oberlin Collegiate Institute, where both sexes were able to take classes together and understand that women suffered because men at first really pushed for a non-female um, campus, and so that's what you're gonna see is that um, the the situation, the environment for women was very hostile at the beginning as they began to show their knowledge, their strengths. Um, Men became more uh, it became common to men to see women in schools, and eventually it grows into seeing them in the workplace. And so that's something you're going to see with industrialization and its impacts as women become more equal, they become more independent. They're going to challenge the norms that have existed before. So they are going to be taking jobs that usually are not equipped for women. They're gonna be challenging the norm of being educated. So all of this is something that will continue.